This is House Planning Help, episode 212. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and try to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up in this session, self-builder John Fenwick is my guest. He and his wife Jeanette built a new home on the edge of the Scottish Highlands. It's beautiful. It was drawing influence from the traditional steadings there. It's an L-shaped bungalow. It's got a few double height spaces. I think it's got an upstairs section in one part of the building, yet it still meets Passivhaus standard. And I thought this is interesting because I'm always under the impression compact simple form, and that is what we've done with our building. But what happens when you say, no, actually, I need an L-shaped building, or I want a bungalow? So it gets a little bit more complicated. What challenges are you going to face? We'll find out in a moment. 2018 has been the year of my build, and I've in many ways stepped back from events that I would love to attend. I enjoy meeting people, and so it's always a shame when you can't get there. But I'm thinking next year I'm going to really get on the scene and meet as many people as I can. However, there is one presentation that I'm going to be doing at the National Self-Build and Renovation Show, and I'm going to do that on two of the days, the 11th and 12th of May, all about my progress. And a bit like this podcast, if you've stuck with me since the early days or reviewed the archive podcasts, you will have heard a journey. And going back to the National Self-Build and Renovation Centre, it feels like I'm going back to an old friend saying, yeah, in the past I've been here saying, oh, I can't find land. And then, oh, planning permission, it's scary, we're not going to get it. Oh. And then I've just been sharing these gradual updates. So it's going to be lovely to go down there and then have some slides of this is what's happening on site. So we might have to rejig the presentation, think what the focus is going to be there, but quite exciting to get to head back there. We'll put more information at houseplanninghelp.com/events if you can make it down. That's the 11th and 12th of May when I'm going to be there. Let's get to my chat with John Fenwick and talk about his award-winning house. It's nice to get an accolade at the end, isn't it? And I started by asking him when he'd first thought about building his own house.
It must be 8 years ago now, really. And the idea was that we had plans to, or at least I had plans to retire. And the idea was always to move up to Scotland. We put our current house on the market, sold it very quickly, so we had to get moving, really. Looked for a house to move into, couldn't find one. And eventually we got round to thinking, well, perhaps we should look for a plot and build. And that's how it happened, really. So it's a retirement project more than anything else.
Were you aware of where you were moving to, or was it just a massive free-for-all? We know we want to go to Scotland.
No, we'd holiday. I mean, we particularly like the West Highlands more than anything else, and we always thought it would be lovely to live here, live the dream, as it were. But that was the whole idea. We didn't want to be on the coast because it's, the dreaded midgie and stuff. So we knew we wanted to be within touching distance of the Highlands, so that we could pursue these sort of interests and hobbies that we've been doing over the years.
Is it easy to find land that you can build on in that area?
I would have to say no. The land prices are going up at the moment, but once we decided we would build a house, we thought the Black Isle would be a great place to go. And then when we looked more seriously on there, we found that it was just basically one big farm, and there wasn't really many plots available for building on. And we toured the area up the east coast, which was a little bit too far from the west for our liking. Started to sort of think, are we ever going to find a plot? And basically found one on the internet in the end. So I'd say to get a decent sized plot, which would take a house to stand on its own, was fairly difficult to do, really.
Can you describe the final plot that you bought, the pros and cons of it?
Well, it's a big plot, so you certainly feel as if you're part of the countryside, and you look out onto our neighbouring mountain, Ben Wyvis, and its little partner. So originally it was a crofting land, and the land had been decrofted, but it was very overgrown with birch and quite boggy in places and the like. But the size of it and the location of it being fairly central in this part of the world, we decided that was the one to go for, really.
And how did you move things forwards? Was it looking for an architect first, or did you do some other research?
Being total novices in this sort of game, we were actually on holiday somewhere down Perthshire way, and we've been looking around for plots and stuff like that. And we got into the idea of putting a kit house up, the type of house that's the likes of Sky Homes and Hebridean Homes can provide. So we thought that would be the way to go. But was being total novices. We thought, well, how are we going to get a builder? Who's going to build it for us? How are we going to go about the planning? And it was really luck that we stumbled upon the Housing Expo, which was taking place 2010 at Inverness. And we went along there, and basically there was lots of architects, lots of houses, and lots of ideas. So that's what really gelled, was setting up a plan, really, to achieve the build.
And were you looking for Passivhaus straight away? Because that was one of the examples, wasn't it, on this expo?
It was. No, we weren't. We thought, well, we've got an idea what we want. We want a house similar to the steading type that we'd seen the likes of Sky Homes and Hebridean Homes could provide for us. But we thought we might like a little bit more individuality about the house. And it was when we were walking around the various housing projects on the expo site that we stumbled on the Passivhaus terrace. And the chap who provided the kit, the Passivhaus consultant, we had a good chat to him. We thought, well, this seems to be the sensible way to go. So that was at the beginning of the month, and we went back up to Inverness from the northeast. It's like a 300-mile trip. At the end of the month, and we met the architect who designed the Passivhaus terrace, and basically said to him, well, could you do something along these lines? And showed him a few sketches and outlines, and he thought that was a goer, and really it started from there.
So you mentioned along these lines. What did you have in your head at that stage?
Well, we're retired, at least we're not getting any younger. So I thought really a one-story house, so essentially a bungalow, but a one that would actually fit into the context of where we were wanting to live. We'd seen a few modern eco-looking houses that were put in the middle of housing estates, and they just looked totally out of place and lost. And we wanted a house that would actually reflect the place where it was going to go. So the idea of a steading type design, which, like a modern take on it, just seemed to be the ideal way to go, really.
When did the L shape become something that was talked about and then decided on?
The Hebridean Homes example that we'd seen was an L-shaped steading, and we got into looking at steadings, and there's various shapes. We thought we could either go for a longhouse or an L shape, or there are some which are almost like a U shape. But the idea of having a length of the house which essentially was daytime accommodation, and another wing or another length of the house where the bedrooms would be, just seemed a nice way to sort of like make the house flow. So the L seemed to be the sensible way to go, really.
I know you're a technical man, so did you realise what you were getting yourself into? And maybe you can just explain why this is more complex. It's probably more expensive too. Just any pros and cons of what you're doing.
Well, once we decided on the Passivhaus, the biggest challenge for the L shape was the ventilation strategy. Because in an ideal world, your MVHR unit would be at the centre of the house, almost like an octopus with ventilation arms going from it, so that everywhere would be tread equally as far as ventilation and as far as heat recovery and heat distribution is concerned. Easy to balance the whole system. Obviously, we had to have the ventilation equipment somewhere, and our plant room is actually right on the heel of the L, as it were. So the two rooms at the ends of the Ls are the furthest away from the ventilation. And that in itself posed problems, actually just balancing the system out. We had the MVHR people back a couple of times to rebalance it and the like, but it seems to work, but probably not as well as it does in a compact type house.
Maybe you can just explain that balancing process and what it means.
Well, obviously with heat recovery, as the air is extracted from your extraction system back into the ventilation unit, the heat's recovered and then put out in the clean air, which is then distributed amongst the house. Now, I've got temperature sensors on the ventilation system, and when there's extra heat going into the system in the winter from the little post-heating device that we have on it, I know that the air as it leaves the unit is at around about anywhere between 35 and 40 degrees. But if you measure the temperature in the rooms right at the end of the L's, it's basically coming out of the supply ducts at around about 23, 24 degrees, which one supply duct into a big room is not as effective as, say, the study room, which is directly underneath the ventilation equipment and gets air down there virtually at 35 degrees. So the two rooms at the end of the L's have to have additional heating really to get through the winter. One of them's the living room, which has got a wood-burning stove in there, passive certified stove, which is a good way of heating the house because the ventilation system does distribute the heat from that stove through the house eventually. And in the major bedroom, which is at the other end of the L, we've actually got an additional heating element in that room, which in fact is a far infrared panel, which is a mirror. So it just looks like a mirror in the bedroom, but it's thermostatically controlled. I mean, you can control the temperature in that room as a result of that. So they're the two additional heating factors that we needed because of the L-shaped house, I would say, more than anything.
And those are the only two heat sources, or is there an air source heat pump?
Well, whatever house you're in, you've got to be able to heat your domestic hot water. And we're not on the gas grid. Most of the people in the area would use oil to heat their domestic hot water up, which of course we didn't want to do. So we had to have a way of actually producing domestic hot water, and effectively the air source heat pump is for our domestic hot water. Now, the other thing that the air source heat pump does is it actually has a heating circuit in it as well, which normally would be used to fire underfloor heating, but it fires a post heater, a water-based post heater. Basically, it preheats the air when it comes out of the mechanical ventilation system, and it preheats it additional to the recovered heat from the rest of the house. So I'd say that post heater on the mechanical ventilation, the stove in the living room, and the FIR heater in the bedroom are the three main sources of heat. Now, the air source heating circuit also powers three small towel rails in the three bathrooms. Not really sure how effective that is, because really radiators, you tend to think that they should be piping hot for them to work effectively. You can tell the difference when they're on and when they're not, but effectively the air source heat pump is firing those as well.
Let's just head back to the construction, because I suppose in a way we've jumped ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
What did you decide was going to be the construction method? Did it end up being a kit, like you said right at the very beginning?
The houses that we'd seen that were built at Inverness, the Passivhaus terrace, was made from closed timber panels. It was actually a system called the Passivhaus system. And at the time, there was very few of these on the market. So essentially, you've got OSB panels, which are pre-filled with insulation and pre-membraned and the likes, and they're literally put together like a timber frame to create the airtight envelope. So we decided to go with this particular method because the architect had used it on the houses. I mean, the other advantage of it is, as well as there's very clean sort of lines you can achieve inside. So the house has three double height spaces within the floor area, which again is another challenge for Passivhaus because these are huge volume rooms, but you could actually achieve a lovely architectural effect by using closed panels for the walls and for the roofs. So there's no roof timbers whatsoever in the place. So we decided to go for this construction method. The big headache that we had as we just about to start construction was the company who made these panels went into liquidation. And so we had to source similar panels elsewhere. And in fact, the panels for the house eventually came from Ireland, from a company, Unitech. And they seemed to work quite well. Whether they were as good quality as the ones we would have got from the local firm making these panels, we'll never know now.
And who was erecting this and doing the construction work?
Well, that was the other part of the whole build process. Building in the Highlands has its own challenges in that there aren't too many builders operating on the ground, really. So you have less people to choose from. We put the whole project out to tender, and a local builder agreed to take on the contract. It was a fixed price contract, which frightened a couple of people off. But it was a local builder who basically subcontracted the various factions of work to people that he'd used before. So we had different people for the electrics, plumbings, and the like, with one main contractor, a local firm.
And were you living in the area by this stage? Because, of course, you're some distance away. So if you're leaving all this just to tick by on itself...
I would have to say, unfortunately, not. It was when we signed up with the architect, there's two contracts you can go for a self-build. You can either go for a design and build, or you can go for a traditional contract. And there's very little difference in price, but the difference with a traditional contract is that the architect actually visits the site, in our case, once a month, and produces a progress report, see how the builder's gone on. And we were, the type of small works contract that we had, we were paying the builder on a monthly basis for the work that he'd done. We thought once a month would be sufficient, but clearly when you're building a house using principles perhaps not familiar to the builder, I think being on site for the build would have been a huge advantage. The build wasn't without its issues, let us say. So yes, I think 300 miles away, on retrospect, the ideal would have been to be on site.
Was there anything you could do from that distance?
All we could do was liaise with the architect. I mean, obviously the sort of like internet and stuff's a great thing for bouncing things backwards and forward. We sourced all the things like the light fittings and stuff like that, so we could do all those at a distance. But actually communicating with the builder or knowing exactly which days the builder was on site was very difficult to actually monitor. We used to visit the site when we could really, but in the end of the day, it probably was every 6 weeks or so. And on some occasions, 6 weeks after we'd last visited, we visited the site and we thought, well, what on earth's happened? Not a lot, it would seem. So monitoring progress and keeping on top of the builder, which we'd hoped as prime contractor, he would have, project managed the thing himself. It wasn't a great success. It would have been better to have been there.
Do you think some of it was down to the fact that he could be doing bits on other jobs as well, or was it knowledge? What was going on?
Well, both, I think, really. I think knowledge. He did go for some instructional sessions with the person who'd originally been involved, the Passivhaus consultant, to say what were the importance of wrapping membranes and things like that. But there were mistakes made, which was quite costly for him to rectify. I mean, fortunately for us, it didn't cause us anything financially to disadvantage us. But it was frustrating because had it been done right the first time, there wouldn't have been any need for it.
Was it to do with air tightness and insulation, those really key factors? Well,
the way that we did it was the first air test was booked. We were there for it. The architect was there. There was obviously no plasterboard on the walls because, you go around and you find out where the leaks were, the odd leak, as it were, and that to gain it. And basically we were so far off the mark, it was just unbelievable. And there were simple things like one of the joiners found a hole outside where air was getting in, which he literally could get his fist into. So the first air test was actually a waste of time, apart from telling us really that the builder hadn't understood that attention to detail, as far as taping and stuff like that, was absolutely paramount. There'd be something simple like anywhere where there's a service comes in through the slab, obviously you need to put airtight foam in to maintain the airtightness of the envelope. And it was obvious that the builder had used standard building foam. And when asked why hadn't he used the specified airtight foam, he said, well, I couldn't get it at the local builders, merchants. I mean, this stuff's available on the internet. You can buy it from Amazon. So it was just simple things like that. The attention to detail just wasn't there. If we'd been on site, I think we could have kept on top of that a lot better.
It's quite interesting because I'm heading to site probably every 2 days, quite consistently. Yeah. But I don't know how much influence I'm being, and really, in a way, although I've seen lots of builds, how useful I am in thinking that's going to be a problem later. But our guys are pretty good, and so hopefully, I'm fingers crossed. I'm thinking, should I be more involved than I am?
I think if you've got a builder who's prepared to take on the challenge and is a learning sort of like experience for himself, and is particularly, attention to detail is paramount to him, I think things go fine. I mean, there was a build going on Skye at the same time as our house. It was a grand design featured house. The two ladies that had built the coffin house in the north end of Skye.
Yes.
And watching those guys work, you could see the difference in their attention to detail, particularly on the taping and stuff like that, compared with our particular builder, really.
Now, we probably need to start wrapping up fairly soon. Let's just have a think. Is there anything else about the build that we should know about?
Well, whenever you're doing Passivhaus, whether it's our build or whether it's a compact build or whatever, your supplementary heating is always something that you have to seriously consider. And the big question is always, do I put underfloor in or do I not? There are a number of passive houses that have had underfloor heating put into them or extra radiators. And in some cases, people say it was a waste of money putting it in because we never use it. But you have to make the choice whether or not you actually put underfloor heating in. The passive house will still have a beneficial effect in that the underfloor heating won't be worked as hard as it would be in a less well-insulated and airtight house. But the problem is, when you heat your house up with underfloor heating, if the sun suddenly should come out and start flooding your house with sunlight and stuff like that, it's very difficult to cool it down because underfloor heating takes, a couple of days for the effects to wear off. So we didn't put it in, and we've had several debates about it. I think we're still convinced we did the right thing, because it's the whole point is that, if you're going to put underfloor heating in and stuff like that, you really need to build a passive house standard. But there will be times when you need to give the heating in the house a bit of a boost, particularly if the house is left empty for a week. If you're away a week on holiday and you just switch everything off, if the sun hasn't shone for that week, when you come back, then all the things that make a passive house work, such as recovering from cooking, heating, just being in the house, stuff like that, is not there. So effectively, eventually the house will cool down.
You've mentioned that it gets pretty cold there. So in the building, having lived there for a while now, how do you feel it performs?
It performs very well. There's no doubt about it. It was quite interesting on television. I mean, there's obviously a lot of concern about people keeping their houses warm in the winter and making sure that they have your heating on and stuff like that. And what used to be 21 degrees, now the norm seems to be 18. So, the recommendations, make sure your house is at 18 degrees. And it's quite interesting that all the literature that comes with mechanical ventilation, with the product and stuff like that, shows rooms being kept at around about 18. And realistically, that's what we achieve. But 18 degrees, measured with, standard off-the-shelf max min thermometers, not the most accurate in the world, but they're good enough. 18 in a passive house without drafts and stuff like that is comfortably warm. You get up in the middle of the night and have to walk, to the kitchen for a drink or something like that, you don't feel cold or anything like that. And the house is at around about 18 degrees. So I would say that most of the time in the winter, we try to keep things at around about 18 degrees. In the summer, it probably does go up a bit, but you just open your windows if you get too hot.
Thinking about this L shape, we talked about it earlier, and we're coming back round again now that you're living in the house. Would you do it this way again?
I think I probably would, because in the end of the day, you've got to have a house which you're comfortable living in. I mean, we wanted a house that had a bit of style about it. We love the open space. It flows well. The double height rooms, would we or wouldn't we? Well, if we hadn't done, we would have wanted them. Looking at it again, I would say that, yeah, we would do it exactly the same way, because we've been very happy in the house. I think the one thing that we would change, perhaps, and again, this is where the architect designs the house, great deal of architectural style. The window in our main bedroom is absolutely huge. It's a lovely big picture window, massive. Of course, there's a lot of angst because the window company went bust when we were ordering the windows up. It's always the windows with a build. And we had a lot of trouble actually getting a substitute window up to scratch that worked in that bedroom. Now, as far as passive certified, and so there's no doubt, even with triple glazed windows, it's still the weak point in the envelope, because a window, despite the U values that they're quoting, that isn't as insulated as a wall is. You feel your windows in the winter, and they do feel cool, and there'll be a certain element of them actually cooling the room down. But this window has been in and out 3 times to achieve the air tightness that we wanted, because, well, it's a long story really, but the other big problem as well is that, people in these houses that have huge amounts of glass, whenever we see them on the telly, we always say, where's the blinds? How do they sleep at night and stuff like that? And getting blinds for some of these windows has been a challenge. One of the biggest challenges of the house, to be honest. But overall, I think it always, neighbors come in, it's -8 outside, and they always say how incredibly warm the house feels, even when there's no additional heating, the stove's not on, stuff like that. So it does work. But I think that what you tend to get is that the house will settle naturally at a temperature that's, say, 15, 16 degrees warmer than outside. So if it's -8 outside and you've got a mechanical ventilation running, that air that's coming in is at -8, whatever happens. Now, you can put a defroster on the system to make sure that the whole system doesn't freeze up, but you've still got pretty cold air actually going into the mechanical unit. I mean, 5 degrees is often the air going in, and you've only got so much heat from the extracted air mixing with that. So the colder it is outside, the more challenging it is for the house, full stop. Now, you can say, well, shall I just switch it off at night in the winter? These are all questions that have to be answered. I've tried switching it off and I've tried putting it on. It actually doesn't make a great deal of difference. But the fact still is that you've got a little hole in the wall, which is letting air in at 5 degrees in the winter. Now, would most people have a window open all night? Probably not. So there is challenges with mechanical ventilation as well, which, you've got to have it in a passive house because it's so airtight. But you have to be aware that if the temperature goes up a few degrees outside, you do notice the difference inside. So the house reacts to the temperature outside, there's no doubt about it. And where we are, the challenges are pretty extreme, really.
Well, John, I've really enjoyed chatting to you about your house again. Beautiful house. I think it's an award-winning house, isn't it? We know that from the Passivhaus Trust Awards. So thank you so much for chatting to us. And I hope one day I will be passing again. Well, best of luck with your build as well, Ben. Head online to take a look at the show notes for this session at houseplanninghelp.com/212, where you can review the key points. We always like you to have something to be able to reflect on after you've heard the interview, so you can go and skim through it again, including some photos of the plot, of construction, also a video that will take you through that, a whistle-stop 2-minute video. houseplanninghelp.com/212. Hub members can also check out a short presentation that John gave on one of our progress calls recently. We always love this video conferencing because you can ask questions in real time as you look at various plans, and we just can't do that on the podcast. So that's definitely a fun thing that we can do in the Hub. If you're not one of our Hub members, what are you missing out on? Well, essentially, it's just about continuing the learning and trying to do it in a different form. Probably the Hub really was born out of my desire to create high quality videos all about eco builds, just to see a process through, because you can be on site and you will have questions. However, you normally go on site and maybe you check out a build once or twice if you're lucky. So if you can't have that, well, what about if we make sure that we are going to site every week or every few days and packaging these into videos that are going to be full of useful information? And it's funny, sometimes it's just simple things like the terminology. I get really confused. We're talking about beams and trusses and all these sorts of things. But the more you see them, what did we have the other day? I was up on site and the carpenter, or Chippy, I should say, was talking about a 400 mil. I'd asked, how wide is this? 400 mil centres. Is that what? 400 mil centres? What does that mean? And it's from the centre of the piece of timber that he was talking about to the centre of the next one. Now I understand. So all those little things along the way, we're trying to bring you that experience. Another angle is the community, because if you're amongst like-minded people all embarking on their own eco build, well, we're probably all going to have different experience that we can share and help each other along. So that's another big side of it as well. We don't bar anyone. We do say that we're focusing on people who are building in the UK, but that doesn't stop you. We have people around the world. Also, maybe you're an architect who's always wanted to watch these videos. Perhaps you haven't done Passivhaus yourself and you're just interested in what's in there. We're not going to stop you, so long as you're not going to go all sales pitch on us or anything like that. Then houseplanninghelp.com/join. Next time, Stephen Thompson from the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors is my guest, and we ask this question. It's a big one. Do you need to have a contract with your builder? So mull that over until we meet next. Thanks for listening. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.